Welcome to Saroyan on Screen, a year-long look at the film and television offerings of William Saroyan. I'm your host, Chris Garcia. Today we're looking at the most famed and beloved adaptation of Saroyan's work, MGM's The Human Comedy. There are some apparent myths surrounding Saroyan and the production of The Human Comedy. The first is that Saroyan completely divorced himself from the production. While he was not hands-on with the project, he did have opinions and remained in touch with Louis B. Mayer and others at MGM. Saroyan and Mayer had an apparently pleasant phone call on June 11th, 1942, weeks after Saroyan had walked off the lot and headed home to San Francisco. He sent Mayer a letter the next day stating, "First of all, let me say that I'll always be ready to help Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer in making of this picture, and that I do not seek any remuneration for any assistance I may be able to give. I regard a work of art, even if it is my own work, as having a life of its own, and I regard The Human Comedy as both a work of art and an American expression of faith, which is urgently needed by the country at this present time. I believe that the making of this picture is an obligation which transcends any class of personalities, and for my part, I have long forgotten our differences of opinion as to the proper procedure in the making of the picture." Saroyan also visited the set, met with the screenwriter and director, as well as with Mayer. "Dear Mr. Mayer, it was good seeing you again, even if only for a moment. I am delighted with the way The Human Comedy is shaping up." The U.S.'s entry into World War II was about 6 months old at that point, and The Human Comedy dealt with the home front as well as the soldiers' experiences of the war. Saroyan was certainly aware that this film needed to maintain a positive message while still presenting the pain and loss that always follows in times of war. Saroyan added in his letter to Mayer, "It is exactly by the production of such works as The Human Comedy that we may help to win this war, and after the winning of it, to secure that peace without which the world will once again be insecure in its foundations." Following Louis B. Mayer's decision that Saroyan was not up to the task of directing The Human Comedy, Saroyan left the project almost entirely. Mayer had initially planned to have King Vidor direct, but Vidor ended up off the project, working on The Yearling and National Velvet, neither of which he would end up directing, and both of which he would be replaced by Charles Brown, who was also chosen to direct The Human Comedy. Saroyan, though, did have opinions on who should direct, and expressed them in both his journal and letters to Mayer and Eddie Mannix. He listed a few people he thought would be good for the production team of The Human Comedy. For producer, Arthur Frees, and director, Victor Fleming. If they were not available, producer Sam Zimbalist and director William Wyler. All of them were busy on other projects at MGM, so Brown was Mayer's choice. Fleming would have been working on finishing work on Tortilla Flat until May 1942. Wyler, on the other hand, would have either just wrapped or was very nearly to complete his work on Mrs. Miniver, which would win Best Picture, and Wyler himself Best Director. It's likely that Saroyan would have wanted one of his four involved because they were his drinking buddies and likely would have given him an in on the proceedings. Freed would have been a slightly unusual choice to produce. Freed was best known as a producer of musicals and would have been working on For Me and My Gal. Zimbalist would have also been finishing up on Tortilla Flat, so likely unavailable. The choice, Clarence Brown, was a major director at the studio, having directed 3 films that earned him Best Director Academy Award nominations already. He was also frequently assigned to direct actors like Greta Garbo and Joan Crawford. He was a confident and well-respected director. So confident was Mayer in Brown's abilities, he was also assigned as producer. It's unclear if he had been assigned to producer first and was simply slotted into the director's chair as he had already been assigned. It may have been that Mayer simply wanted to save a significant paycheck by having Brown take on both roles. Cinematography was one area where MGM was absolute king. The cinematographer chosen was Harry Stradling. His work on the human comedy led to his first of 14 Academy Award nominations, though he wouldn't win until 1945 for his work on The Picture of Dorian Gray. His take on the setting is incredibly nuanced, working equally well within sets and on location. He was known for being an exceptionally strong cinematographer for an intimacy in his shooting. And a film like The Human Comedy, it establishes connection with the individual characters. He often shot high contrast, using shadows to emphasize tone and mood, which makes the visuals a character almost, providing a sort of depth that brings weight to the heavier emotions of the piece. The editing of the piece is fairly simple, and was handled by Conrad A. Nervig. He was an incredibly busy editor, and also the winner of the very first Academy Award for Best Editing. The treatment Saroyan had delivered needed to be translated into a screenplay. The job was assigned to Howard Estabrook. Estabrook had started out in Hollywood as an actor, then transitioned to directing and producing, though he would become best known as a writer, including winning the Oscar for his adaptation of Cimarron. Estabrook was known to handle source material well, and his adaptations included The Bridge at San Luis Rey and Hell's Angels. From the beginning, coverage of the film's production, including Saroyan's issue of Mayer, had been very thorough. Gossip columnists like Hedda Hopper and Luella Parsons had mentions from the very beginning, all likely planted by Mayer's people. On February 16th, even before the production of The Good Job, Luella Parsons reported, "The fabulous William Saroyan, author of many fantastic stories and plays, has turned over to MGM a 400-word scenario, The Human Comedy." The scenario she's talking about was The Treatment, delivered to MGM on February 2nd, and read by Mayer on the 10th of February. One of the other major columnists, Frederick Othman, corrected Parsons in his column 4 days later, including noting the length of the treatment that Saroyan had delivered as more than 200 pages. Parsons added, "There's quite a story back of the Saroyan deal. He said he wanted to write a story directly for the movies and that he didn't want to be bothered until he had completed a satisfactory job. So he went to his home in San Francisco, and The Human Comedy is the result. MGM bought it, and Saroyan will develop it. Later, he will put his movie in book form. He is probably not as altruistic as this sounds, for, I reckon, he will get a pretty sum for the completed movie script." Othman had a quote from Saroyan in his article where he countered Parsons' 400-word scenario claim. "The plot is man himself. It will show that all men, through art and religion, are immortal. It will reveal people to themselves. It will entertain them, too, better than most these movie comedies. It is a story of a town, Ithaca, California, and of a family in the town. If it can be said there is a hero, the hero is everything." There are varying reports of what Saroyan was being paid. Several reports listed $100,000 as a price, including Parsons and A.D. Mackey, while columnists Hedda Hopper and Bel Air reported $60,000. The actual figure, $60,000 up front and $1,000 a week while the film was in production, does show that both figures weren't exactly accurate, but neither fully wrong. There is no reporting if Saroyan got points on the back end or if everything was paid up front. There was also a good deal of coverage of the casting and assignment of the production team. The first clear reporting of Rooney as playing the lead in the film was on February 4th, 1942. Throughout April, names like James Craig, Marsha Hunt, and Frank Morgan were mentioned, while King Vidor was announced as assigned director in early May 1942. Clarence Brown was first said to be directing in late July. It is unclear when he was assigned as producer. The tension between Mayer and Saroyan was reported on widely. On May 2nd, columnist Sidney Skolke's article led with, "Saroyan's Story of the Week. Metro and William Saroyan have come to a parting of the ways, and the biggest individual movie contract since Orson Welles signed with RKO is being called off. The reason for the disagreement is that Saroyan wants to direct a screenplay, The Human Comedy, and Metro doesn't believe Saroyan is ready as yet to direct such an important and expensive picture. I direct that one or I quit," declared Saroyan. Metro wants Saroyan to stay at the studio. The LA Times reported, Saroyan, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, part company. Evidently, the genius of William Saroyan could not be harassed into the movies after all. They later added, possibly the studio was dubious about entrusting the fate of a top-notch boy star, Mickey Rooney, to the dramatist, because, of course, Mickey was slated to appear in the human comedy. Saroyan may have helped push these rumors along, and we'll cover that aspect in our next episode. As far as the film itself, it is an absolute classic, and one that demonstrates how different film is today. The film opens with a bit of introductory narration by the deceased Mr. Macaulay, his head superimposed over a shot of a cloudy sky. He introduces the family and the general setting. It is a technique that many movies used at the time to introduce audiences to the world of the film. Perhaps the most notable is Citizen Kane, which does the same thing, only using a faux newsreel. The human comedy, then, goes on to one of the key images from the book. Young Ulysses Macaulay waving to a singing African-American traveling on a passing train. It is one of the most effective scenes for setting tone of the time, and it certainly hits home 80 years later in giving us that feeling of setting. It is clearly a story that will dwell in the sentimental fold of the fabric of America. And while today that may feel hokey, it absolutely fit in with the rest of Saroyan's work. That scene is followed by another amazing scene where Ulysses interacts for the first time with his mother at the chicken coop. This scene is often used to show the difference between the book and the film. The scene is simple, mostly illustrating the bond between mother and son. It's so simple, and while it provides more of the homey Americanness, that's all there is to it, and all there needs to be. The scene is included in both the treatment and the script, in the more simple form. The scene takes roughly a minute of screen time, and is the illustration of one paragraph from the novel. His mother was in the yard, throwing feed to the chicken. She watched the young boy trip and fall and get up and skip again. He came quickly and quietly and stood behind her, then went to the hen nest to look for eggs. He found one. He looked at it a moment, picked it up, brought it to his mother, and very carefully handed it to her, by which he meant what no man can guess and no child can remember to tell. The difference between those exact scenes in each format is so telling. Saroyan described the scene in the original treatment almost exactly as it appeared on the screen, but the pure limitation of the form, without using voiceover to express it, meant the idea of the immense power of childish wonder would be so difficult to come across. In the book, Saroyan could give it a thorough treatment. The film unfolds to tell the story of the entire Macaulay family, though focusing on Homer, a young telegraph messenger. Mickey Rooney, then one of the leading box office attractions in the world, plays Homer, so it's natural that the film would focus on him. The book follows much the same path, though the difference there might be the identification of Homer with Saroyan himself. Saroyan would have been roughly the same age as Ulysses when his father died, though unlike Ulysses, he was sent to live in a home in Oakland for 5 years. Perhaps this was him trying to rewrite his own sense of loss with his character. It's very clear that Saroyan considered him the heart of the story, giving it emotional weight and importance, even though he was not the driver of the action, which was certainly Homer. Saroyan could easily be identified with Homer as well, having worked as a messenger boy also. Rooney's performance demonstrates why he was such a strong performer his entire life. He had become a star with his Mickey Maguire series of short films. These were exceptionally popular, and led him to sign a contract with MGM in the mid-1930s. There he met and began making films with Judy Garland, who he would make several musical films with. In 1937, the Andy Hardy films launched him into megastardom. he became one of the most in-demand actors in the world. Saroyan would write the character of Homer with Rooney as his model, and was quoted as wanting Rooney to play one of the leading parts in Frederick Othman's column. Director Clarence Brown said Rooney was the closest thing to a genius I ever worked with. Brown had already worked with Rooney on All Wilderness, and would work with him again on National Velvet, as well as one of the Andy Hardy films. Rooney's performance in the human comedy would have been a natural for his range, and his delivery of both the highly dramatic and the comedic is just about as good as you'll find in the 1940s. Scenes such as his explanation of the prayer he delivers during a family dinner show that he understood the usefulness of the pause, which is something even the script or Saroyan's detailed treatment could only hint at. Rooney's instincts are absolutely dead on in this iconic performance that led to his second Academy Award nomination for Best Actor. The story deals with Americans' lives during World War II, both on the home front and on the front lines. We are shown some moments in the life of the oldest Macaulay son, Marcus, played by Van Johnson. Marcus is off at war, though not yet in battle. Van Johnson had been on Broadway and had signed with MGM the year prior. He was a likable presence in film, and was on his way to becoming one of the major stars of war films, including 30 Seconds Over Tokyo, Battleground, and the Caine Mutiny. He began to regularly play police officers and detectives in the 1950s and 60s, before his career began to turn more towards television than film. The role of Mrs. Macaulay is a difficult one, because it must portray a sense of melancholy and joy and dedication all within the same performance. Mrs. Macaulay is played by Faye Bainter, who had won an Oscar 5 years prior for her role in Jezebel opposite Bette Davis. She was already an old hand in Hollywood and had the chops to deliver such a layered performance within a rather brief appearance on screen. Her interaction with young Ulysses Macaulay are full of tender, loving kindness. She serves as both teacher and nurturer. One of the finest performances of the film comes from one of the most seasoned actors in the picture, Frank Morgan. He had been making films since 1916 and had successfully made the transition from silent pictures to talkies. He was an incredibly busy actor, moving between film and radio work. He had played the Wizard in The Wizard of Oz, and had just been nominated for Best Supporting Actor for his performance as the pirate in Tortilla Flat. In the human comedy, he plays Mr. Grogan, the telegrapher, who at once acts as something of a grandfatherly figure to Homer, but also treats him like an adult and a friend. He's also a drunk, and his performance there might have been informed by his well-documented love of liquor. He reprised the role in the 1943 radio drama version of the human comedy, broadcast as a part of the Screen Guild Players on July 12, 1943, though he was replaced by another Hollywood legend, Francis X. Bushman, in a 1949 adaptation for Screen Directors Playhouse, broadcast only 9 days before Morgan's death at the age of 59. Of note, the 1949 episode of Screen Directors Playhouse has an excellent introduction by Clarence Brown.
When we filmed the human comedy, I was fascinated by the title that William Saroyan had given his story. I rather think he called it a comedy to accentuate the fact that it comes within a hair of being tragic. In that margin of difference lies the breadth of our human genius for finding happiness in a universe that can be both cruel and sweet.
The film moves very much like any Saroyan story or novel. There's a through line, but the beats of that story are peaks, which valley into vignettes showing the world as Saroyan sees it, or at least wishes it would be. In those valleys, entire plot lines dwell. There are fascinating moments, such as the one between Mr. Spangler, played admirably by James Craig, and his girlfriend, Diana Steed, played by Marsha Hunt, whose career would last nearly 80 years. Spangler meets Diana's friends and family. It shows Saroyan's traditional refusal of social hierarchy, while also playing with a sort of optimistic cynicism. Perhaps no scene had less to do with the actual story of the film than a car ride passing through various ethnic groups celebrating in the summer festival. It's perhaps the most significant scene in the entire film for establishing Saroyan's own view of the world and the various groups that populate it. Here, Spengler and Diana are just married, and the drive does feel somewhat shoehorned in. At the same time, without it, the film feels as if it is incomplete, not telling the story of the immigrant populations in a story told by one of the most important figures of a diaspora population, William Saroyan. Spengler narrates the scene while they drive with his new bride, including the wonderful line, "Armenians! I can always tell the Armenians. You can tell by the priest and the kids. That's what they believe in, God and children." The score at this point, a variation on God Bless America, may be a part of why some might call it an overly sentimental scene. But at that moment in history, it's clear America needed a feel-good moment of inclusion, and that scene certainly provided it. The line, "I like to see people happy, that's the way it should be," might sum up the word Saroyan-esque better than any other. The scene is included in the original treatment and in the novel as well, with the version in the novel being significantly longer. Scenes such as Homer reading from Marcus a letter, which seems to act almost as a will, are dramatic. And though they do slow the film somewhat from the modern cinematic point of view, they are incredibly effective. This was a point in film history that hadn't yet gone through the 1960s and 70s, when the filmic vocabulary we know today was truly established, and a new form of cinematic pacing occurred. Perhaps the most difficult addition made by screenwriter Howard Estabrook is the ending, where the spirits of Mr. Macaulay and Marcus walk through the door into the house. For a film that dwells so naturally in the realm of American realism, it is an odd way to bring us closure, though also a beautiful way to show us one of Saroyan's grand messages. We never truly leave home. This message can be seen in so many of his works, and here is far more metaphysical than Saroyan tended to play. The story, while paced in a way we might not fully appreciate today, delivers a message very well. In the opening of his treatment for the film, Saroyan wrote, "The human comedy is an American fable of human blessedness. It is an expression of faith in the reality of man's innocence and nobility, and a hymn to the unconscious kinship with the angels." The film certainly accomplishes the delivery of that message, though perhaps not as thoroughly as Saroyan would have liked. While not deviating too far from Saroyan's treatment, Saroyan thought the film was phony, and MGM had turned it towards a propaganda film designed to get Americans to accept the death of their sons in war. There may be something to that idea, but his treatment, and certainly his novel, plays in the same field, delivers that same message, perhaps only unconsciously. Perhaps it was only when it was taken out of his hands that it was plain to Saroyan, or perhaps he was only looking for a reason to be hurt and angry upon seeing that it accomplished its goal. There is an interesting point of departure that might actually speak to Saroyan's view. In the telegraphy office, in both the book and the film, Mr. Grogan asks Homer, "Do you think that this world will be a better place after the war?" In the book, as well as in the original treatment, Homer answers simply, "Yes, sir." In the film, Homer responds, "I think it's got to be." Saroyan's issues were not just for its propaganda use, but also for its decision for what was and wasn't included. He saw Ulysses as a character that was flattened in the final film. There is no question that the role played by the child in the book is stronger than in the film, though it's also true that the way he is played by young Jack Jenkins, who is known as a scene stealer, showed a restraint that felt so much more than you'd expect from a child actor of 5 years old. He carries more emotional weight than most child actors in their performances, and it pays off. A lovely scene where Ulysses accompanies an older boy to the library and marvels at the books is absolutely charming, no matter when you're watching it. Saroyan complained about the minimization of social commentary. This is an interesting note, as there are certainly more of it in both the novel and the treatment, though it is far from absent in the film. The relationship between Homer and Hubert Ackley III might be more pointed on screen than in the book, partly because of how Rooney delivers his performance. Cuts were going to be required, and perhaps the fair scene was used to replace several of the scenes that showed the various ethnic groups of Ithaca. Missing is one of the most beloved series of interactions in Ara's Market, featuring the oft-quoted "cookies, raisins in" line between the grocer, a father, and a young child. Ara and his market are featured in the treatment, but Estabrook cut him from the final screenplay. Overall, Saroyan felt the film was phony, and there are clear arguments for and against that idea. The script does follow the treatment in tone, and most of the notes it hits were clearly Saroyan. Estabrook did choose to tone down the sentimentality, which certainly would have annoyed Saroyan, known for his sentimentality. Whether or not the choice to do so worked better than Saroyan's is a difficult matter, but it's clear that Saroyan's film would have been so much longer that merely from a pacing standpoint, it was probably a valid choice. Whether or not the sentimentality was truly toned down is another somewhat open question. One thing that is unquestionable is that this is a William Saroyan film, even if he was not involved in the actual production of the picture. The melancholy that permeates, the hopefulness of the characters, the cleanliness of the dialogue, the power of the characterization, and perhaps most importantly, the joy in the moments that call it forward, and the effusiveness of the sorrow for those moments, all speak of Saroyan's talents. It is undeniably a Saroyan picture, and even when we are clearly shown the ways of the director, screenwriter, cinematographer, and editor, it never overwhelms that sensation. The reviews of the human comedy were generally good. A note in Sidney Skolsky's column on December 20th, 1942 said, "They previewed William Saroyan's picture, The Human Comedy, the other night, and everyone at Metro is very enthusiastic about it, declaring it to be one of the fine pictures." Variety said Saroyan's initial original screenplay is a brilliant sketch of the basic fundamentals of the American way of life, transferred to the screen with exceptional fidelity. Philip Scheuer of the LA Times wrote, "The human comedy will be a religion to many people." And then later, "Saroyan's story has no villains, no visible antagonists, and very little conflict. As one reviewer said of the book, it is not concerned with evil. Like Father Flanagan believes, there are no bad boys and obviously no bad girls either. The result is an idealized concept of America which, true or false, it clearly behooves us to live up to from now on. We can't let Saroyan down." Singular praise was heaped upon Rooney, including syndicated critic and gossip columnist Jimmy Fiddler saying, "Best performance! Mickey Rooney in The Human Comedy, America's favorite kid clown, hits a dramatic bullseye." Of course, no product out of Hollywood ever receives universal praise. In the case of The Human Comedy, most dissenters pointed to the excess of sentimentality. From Walter Winchell's column on March 7th, 1943, George Jean Nathan, Saroyan's biggest booster, when the rest of us couldn't appreciate him, is the lone dissenter on Saroyan's latest hit film, The Human Comedy. Calls it sticky sentimentality. Saroyan may have hated the film as well, but Louis B. Mayer is said to have loved it. He's widely quoted saying that it was his favorite of the MGM pictures. While the critics were very positive on the picture, the audiences were not quite as receptive. Against a budget of $1 million, the picture took in roughly 3.9. Not nearly the smash hit Mayer et al. Had expected. It was no flop, though expectations were clearly higher. The top-selling films of that year, This Is the Army and For Whom the Bell Tolls, were massive hits, both of which very different kinds of war pictures. Casablanca would be the critical darling of the year and had a long-lasting impact on Hollywood. While The Human Comedy did make money, it was not even MGM's top picture of the year. That was Thousands Cheer, a musical produced with the idea of raising the morale for American audiences as sort of a cinematic USO show. It also featured Frank Morgan and Donna Reed, who appeared in The Human Comedy, and starred Gene Kelly, Saroyan's friend, who had also starred in The Time of Your Life on Broadway. The two also had several meetings during Saroyan's time in Hollywood. Even if the film was not a runaway blockbuster, the book was one of the top-selling books in America, and the best-selling of Saroyan's career. The picture received several Academy Award nominations, including Best Actor for Rooney, Best Director for Clarence Brown, Best Cinematography, and Best Picture. It lost out on that final one to Casablanca. The film won only one Oscar for Best Screen Story, which was awarded to William Saroyan for writing the original treatment. Eddie Mannix sent his congratulations. It is a pleasure to congratulate you on an Academy achievement. I am justly proud of you and happy that your efforts were recognized and so fittingly rewarded. You have done a fine job. The human comedy, film and book, did not end in 1943. It inspired several significant relaunches. A pair of radio adaptations, both featuring Rooney returning to play Homer, for example. There were television adaptations in the 1950s and early 60s. There was an attempt by Saroyan to use the characters for a television series in 1963, which MGM's contract put a damper on, save for a pilot which was later broadcast as a part of Summer Playhouse in 1964, featuring Homer McCauley being played by Tim Rooney, Mickey's son. After Saroyan's death, a Broadway play was created by Galt McDermott. In 2015, actress Meg Ryan directed Ithaca, which will have its own episode later in this series. The human comedy stands as one of the crowning achievements of Saroyan's career. Later in his life, he came to appreciate the film, even if he still had problems with the message. He eventually became friendly with director Clarence Brown and his wife, and was constantly trying to leverage the property to the best of his ability for various projects. The issues with Mayer were real, though, contrary to what many have said over the years, it was not the end of Saroyan's involvement with Mayer or MGM, which will be the basis for our next episode. Saroyan and MGM after the human comedy. Thank you for listening to Saroyan on Screen, a production of Forever Saroyan. I'm archivist Chris Garcia. Thanks for listening.